All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Implementing Effective Governance for Business Intelligence. Today, we have two great speakers, Marius Moscovici, CEO and founder of Metric Insights, joined by Donna Burbank. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years of experience in data strategy, information management, data modeling, metadata management, and enterprise architecture. She is currently the managing director at Global Data Strategy, an international information management consulting company that specializes in the alignment of business drivers with data-centric technology. As an active contributor to the data management community, she is a longtime DAMA International member, past president and advisor to the DAMA Rocky Mountain chapter, and was awarded the Excellence in Data Management Award from DAMA International. Before Donna kicks off the webinar, just a couple of things. All lines are muted. So to chat with your fellow attendees, please use the chat box. And for any questions, we will be having a Q&A at the end. So please enter any questions into the Q&A box. All right, Donna, all you.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. So as Zoe had mentioned, what we're covering today is the idea of data governance, which I think you're all familiar with, and the idea of business intelligence, which I think you're all familiar with, but that intersection of how you strike the right balance of getting the business value from BI, which is one of the big drivers of business intelligence, as well as getting that right level of governance. And how do you hit, and one of the things we always try to do in our practice is get that right balance with the quick wins of focus on the business value, but also make sure that you're governing your data assets effectively. So in terms of today's agenda, looks long, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. Marius will keep me honest so I can talk. So I think what we want to focus on first is the why. How BI drives business value. I think that's probably not very controversial. I mean, that is the whole purpose of business intelligence, but the idea of data governance driving business value maybe is a little less obvious to people. So let's talk about that. It's not worth doing anything else without that why. And then a little bit about the who. A big part of data governance is that accountability, as well as getting buy-in from the key stakeholders, some different methods of getting that. The how, we don't want to forget the technical. So you could have buy-in from the people, but there is a tech aspect involved. I won't go as deeply into all of the areas. Metadata is near and dear to my heart, but Marius will be doing a demo towards the end. So I want to save a little bit of the thunder for him there, but I'll give you an overview of some of the things Marius will be covering. And then a little bit about the when and where of how do you get that magical quick win that we all talk about. It's a bit of an art and a bit of a science, and we try to do a lot of that in our practice. So how do you put those pieces together? And then again, I'll pass it over to Marius to give a little overview of Metric Insights. So unless you have been hiding under a rock, which, gosh, in today's world, I try to, just kidding, you have heard about this idea of a data-driven business. So what I find interesting about these quotes, these are all business magazines, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, all talking about data and the need to have a data-driven business. A little typo there, they have data scientist being the data sexiest job of the 21st century. I'm sure you've heard that. I think it was BI or data governance professional, but whatever, we can give them that. But the idea is the data is hot and more businesses are trying to get value for data. So what happens is a proliferation of dashboards, a lot of people trying to get their fingers in businesses wrapped around data, which is great. That is definitely the positive. A survey I had done a while back with Dataversity, it's a kind of an online education group, if you hadn't heard of. These reports are available on our Global Data Strategy website if you want to read the full report. But what I think is kind of the net of a lot of the findings of that report, which I think are very positive results. Over 70% of respondents see that when they listed their assets of their company, which is their inventory, their human resources, data was one of the key strategic assets. And I know that's talked about more and more in business journals of, do we even put data on the financial books? I mean, data is definitely now being seen as a business asset. When you look at what are some of the drivers of data being an asset, probably not a surprise, reporting and analytics. That really is the face of data. I could nerd out a lot on other areas. We can use data for operational use, for et cetera, but the number one, we've done this survey year over year, number one reason for a lot of people looking at data are dashboards. They're just so easy to understand and really drive your business with. What I also find interesting, that there's kind of a concomitant parallel number, which is data governance, is at about 76%. I would like to see it as much, if not more, along with the data analytics. But I think the positive is more and more people understand you can't have great BI without great data behind it. And how do you get great data? You get that with great data governance. So we'll talk a little bit more of that throughout, but I thought these were some good statistics, that it isn't just us saying this on the webinar. This is pretty well standard across the business, that a lot of organizations are headed this way. So what is data governance? I'm a data management professional. We love our definitions. You have to have a definition for everything. So Zoe mentioned the DAMA group. If you're not familiar with that industry organization, highly recommend them. It's generally free or very low cost. There's chapters all over the globe. And they've published, and I was a contributor to, actually, back in the day, the data management body of knowledge. So I thought, well, let's use their definition, which I actually like, where they have, it's the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making over the management of data assets. And you might wonder my kind of Eastern philosophy and pictures here, but how I look at that, if you're familiar with kind of the idea of yin and yang, right? There's the kind of two opposing forces of one being, more aggressive and the other one being a little more yielding. And I kind of think when you're trying to data governance, there's a little bit of both. One is that exercise of authority and control, the stick, if we think of the carrot and the stick, telling people what to do, having the rules and regulations and the policies. In many cases, those are absolutely needed. If you are in a regulated industry, you're doing pharmaceutical development, I hope you have some rules and policies around your data. Or if you're a financial organization, I hope you have rules and policies around my accounts, right? So I'm not belittling those. I think sometimes with data governance, the stick is overdone, and data governance can get a bad rap because people think, oh, those are the people that tell me what to do all the time, and I want to get the cool stuff done. That's where you need the carrot of the shared decision making. And we'll talk more about this because there's tools and techniques that really have aspects of both. And I think every organization has a little bit of both. Some things like master data, your corporate annual report, you should have a lot of stick around, a lot of policies and rules. That data should be very locked down. You're trying to do some exploratory analytics, and really be collaborative, don't kill it by too much of a stick, right? So you want to have some shared decision making. Hey, this is a good idea. What do you think? Kind of some iteration over that. So you want a tool or a governance process that allows the right level of each of these as you go ahead. That's kind of the yin and yang of data governance. The other thing that I like to push when we talk at the end of this about quick wins and getting business value is using data governance as an opportunity driver, how data governance can help business success. And I think that's probably not stressed enough when we think about just the rules and the stick. Another part of business clearly is risk. So if you're insurance, you're in healthcare, you're in anything, financial services, absolutely, the governance is often driven by that idea of reducing risk. But again, getting that balance of what are those business drivers that are going to help you drive data governance and probably be driving some of your BI reports. So I like to think of this, are we talking about offense or defense? Why are we doing governance? Is it because we really want great analytics around our revenue and customer satisfaction and getting that competitive advantage? Probably a yes. Or are we trying to do audits and fraud detection, and our analytics are more around that compliance and audit and that kind of thing? Probably both, right? So I like to ask the question when I give trainings, where is your organization on the spectrum? Are you clearly red? You're a startup, you're all growth based, and your management wants all the analytics all around revenue growth and customer satisfaction. How are you going to drive it? Or are you more of a historical storied organization and you compliance and audit is really what's driving, or somewhere in between? So think of this when you're defining not only your BI and your analytics, but the governance around that, and how kind of heavy you want to be on the stick and how much you want to push that carrot as well. So good thing to think about. And not that I've ever made a mistake in my consulting career, because of course not. But had I made a mistake, often what I kind of misjudge, you might tell by my animated, moving my hands. I tend to be more in the offense and opportunity and getting excited about things. And the last thing you want to do is go with that attitude of a company that just had an audit, or they're all about, they were just in the press and want to reduce risk. By the same token, you don't want to go to a type of data management often has the kind of downer reputation of being too much about the defense. You do have a CEO who's going to grow his company and this is all great. And you're like, well, let's wait a minute. You could be audited. Yeah, that may be true, but you don't want to kill it, right? So think of who you're talking to when you're trying to sell data governance, because you always are. Sales is always part of your job in life, unfortunately. So one way to think of the need for data governance is probably, again, in all of the above, but you probably want to touch on all of these. Are we more in the defense? We're trying to reduce risk. Is it GDPR? Is it, we're minimizing PCI or HIPAA or, FERPA, or, the list goes on. And that really is the driver. And or are you trying to do more of the offense and really use this to drive opportunity? What is often forgotten are some of the ones on the bottom, improving efficiency. So often you'll hear, well, we don't have time to do that. Well, what is that adage? If you don't have time to do it right, do you have time to do it again? Right. So generally, a company that has great data governance is running really smoothly. You don't have 6 data sets with the same data. You don't have to spend, you have these really valuable BI analysts and data scientists, that sexiest job of the 21st century. And what are they doing? They're cleaning data to just get their analytics right. You don't want to waste that. And then the big part of governance is that accountability. And I like to say collaboration. I mean, I've been doing this for longer than I want to admit. I can't think of a company, maybe one, that anyone came to work trying to make the data bad, right? I think generally people are busy and they have a day job and they might let data quality slip, or they're not thinking of data because they're thinking of something else, and they're maybe not as accountable as they need to be. But generally, when you explain, where this data is used and how other teams are using it, people are pretty bought in to fixing the data because they see the value at the end of the tunnel. So thinking of that, yes, it's accountability, but also generally people, once they understand why, can be more collaborative. So governance and BI and metadata can be very technical, but I think one of the biggest users of metadata and governance is the business. And again, this was another survey we had done a while back when we talked about metadata management, which is, I'm a huge fan of metadata. It is one of the most valuable things in data management, because you really understand the data. Has a terrible name. I wish we would go back in time and not ever use the word metadata. It's such a nerdy, and please don't say metadata is data about data. That just makes it even more confusing, right? But even with that horrible name, 80% of the people who want metadata are the business, because they're the ones actually using the figures and they want that context. Something as simple as, I'm looking at regional sales on the dashboard. How was this calculated? Often the hardest person to sell that, oh, you need to document that, is the person building the dashboard. I just know. Do I really have to spend the time doing that? Yes, you do. And so I think a good BI professional, or just data management professional, or data governance professional, or that sexiest job of the 21st century, when the business person says, show me all the customers by region, the type of thing a BI professional should be thinking of, well, and this is what makes this really fun at parties. Well, how do you define region? And people think you're crazy. It's a region. Come on. But if you've done more than 3 BI reports in your life, you've probably run into this. Well, is it sales region? Is it geographical region? Is region by US state? Is it by province? Is it, there's a lot of complexity on almost every word in there. What do we mean by customer? Is this current customers? What if it's a software company and you have lapsed maintenance? Are they still a customer? Other things, can we have different billing addresses in more than one region, and then they could customer in both regions? There's a lot of complexity over something just as simple as show me all the customers by region. And I won't bore everyone here, but I'm sure we can all tell stories of really embarrassing things or bad business decisions that have been made over something about what's the definition of customer. I worked for a very large unnamed corporation that sent out renewal notices to prospects. Made no sense, right? I mean, they were trying to renew you should go in and renew your software. People hadn't bought the software, but they looked at the customer database, which was the sales database. It was prospects, it wasn't customers, but the word on the database said customer, right? There wasn't good metadata, and there certainly wasn't good governance. So again, this happens still in today's day and age. Something as simple as, what do we mean by customer? What I I beg and I implore, please don't do the I just know. I mean, it may seem so obvious to you. And this is, again, where, you come up at the end of the day and your partner asks you, what did you do? Well, I spent all day defining what a region was or what a location was. And people think you're crazy. Really, they're paying you all that money to define what a location is, right? But once you get into that, you really realize that. So please, when you say, oh, I just know, who wouldn't know what a location is? Is it the location the customer bought the product? Is it the location where that person lives? Is it the location of their credit card statement? I mean, it could be a lot of different things. So just write it down. It takes 5 seconds to write it down, and you're giving a gift to the rest of the organization, and that's metadata. So avoid that. I just know. You just know, but it might not be the same. And I have to have a data governance cartoon because, hey, you have one, you got to use it. And this might not be funny, maybe not be funny at all, but it might not be funny if you're not in data. But who has not been in this type of situation? Great, we're all done with the application. We've built this great new marketing application. Just what's a customer? And that might not seem funny at all, but until you've gone through one of these and you realize it's probably about 17 different slices and dice of what the different type of customer, again, a prospect, a current customer, lapsed customer, high net worth customer, et cetera, et cetera. So another kind of example I like to give, I actually put this slide together years ago when I was trying to talk about SelfService BI and how great the tools are and how easy it is and how there's these open data sets and everyone can be a citizen data scientist. And I didn't mean this to turn into a metadata slide, but I thought it would be kind of funny if I downloaded, there was some open data from the UK that said road safety by vehicle make and model. I said, that could be funny. All the Porsche drivers are getting in more accidents, or is it the Volkswagen drivers? Who knows, right? But this is what I got back. I know that F13 is amazing, or maybe it's bad. It's big. F13 is big, and the make and model is 2015, or is that a date? Or what are these things? I mean, it's absolutely completely unusable data because there's no metadata. And again, I'm sure someone said, gosh, I just know, rolling their eyes, that F13 is whatever it is. I still don't know. I'm dying to know what cars are more risky. But this is a great example of, without metadata, someone curated all this data set, and the BI tool that was used was amazing. Still can't get anything from it. Full circle, just a side note, what I find funny, this was years ago, we're actually a global data strategy, actually working with the folks that published this way back, and they know that the data is an issue and we're helping them clean it up. So funny how life works sometimes, but did come full circle. So they will fix this, and then I can tell you who are the most unsafe drivers in the UK next time. But when you think of this BI reporting user, and the beauty of BI in today's day and age is that it is, I won't say easy, but the tools do make it a lot more accessible to that idea of a citizen data scientist, or the casual BI user that can go into one of the leading BI tools and create a pretty decent mock-up or a visualization. But what really makes that valuable? What are those tools of a glossary definition, right? What do we mean by total sales? What do we mean by, even sales? Is it retail sales, wholesale sales? I mean, I won't keep telling these stories, but I mean, every word has a metadata definitely behind it, and there's a lot of nuance in that. Down to the lower right, certified reports and data sets. I mean, the opportunity is that it is so much easier to get data, publish data, and then use data to create reports. But the risk without governance is that you have a proliferation of just garbage. So can you publish in your platform, this is the certified data set with metadata for vehicles by accident, and then this person would go to the right set, and or here's a report that somebody has already built and this has been certified, to save that person a step. Maybe they want to customize it, but don't reinvent the wheel. The other part of knowing the definition of data is literally, the business definition. Is it a total sales? What does a customer mean? But sometimes that definition is through that lineage. Where did you get that data from? Is that from Salesforce? Is that from the marketing tool? Which data source can be really important, or what was done to that data? Were there transformations upon it? Knowing that lineage or the history, or that provenance of the data could be really, really important. And then this idea that I'll touch on in a bit of crowdsourcing and collaboration, kind of the as I mentioned with these certified reports, some of it's just, wow, you've already done this work and you've already documented it. Let's leverage that. Or this idea of crowdsourcing definitions. Oh, I never realized that you would use that definition of total sales. That's interesting. Can I have that query? I hadn't looked at it with that slice. Or can you publish and really make it a discussion, less of a, this is the rule and thou shalt follow it. But maybe there's a bit of nuance and people want to kind of crowdsource around that and have some discussion threads. What I like to think of in terms of how you do the governance, is it more of an encyclopedia approach or a Wikipedia approach? And what I mean by that is that if you think of an encyclopedia, there's a few, as an example, old gray bearded guys in the university towers that create this definition to say, this is what an elephant is, and this is the history of an elephant, and you get the book once a year and it is published, right? For years and years, this is how we got information. And then something like a Wikipedia came out, and I will be the first to admit I was skeptical. I'm a governance person. I just thought, gosh, this is going to be a nightmare. Just you randomly sort of get eventual consistency over definitions of things. It's going to be a mess. But actually, I use Wikipedia all the time. That enough eyes on something, it is dynamically changing. You have a lot of voices. It can be very effective as well. I think you need to think of which one you want, depending on how your organization works and what type of data. Again, I would say when you're talking about things like master data, or you're talking about your published annual report, that should be kind of an encyclopedia approach. You really shouldn't be changing that. It isn't really, you don't get to kind of crowdsource your annual revenue for the year. Maybe that would make me nervous as a business owner, right? But there are things like I'm trying to do some web analytics, or I'm trying to do some, some exploratory data science on customer churn, right? And I probably want to have a dynamic. What do you mean by churn? And maybe other people have different definitions, and you want that kind of collaborative. You don't want to lock it down so much that people can't have that freedom. And so I think it depends on how your organization works. I started to explain this to one customer. It was a medical company. The word Wicca didn't even come out of my mouth. He said, we are an encyclopedia. If we're talking about your health data, I would agree with them. You don't really get to decide as a collaboration. But at the same time, I've seen other companies that are more innovative and they want to just do more exploratory analytics. And if you only have the encyclopedia approach, you're missing things. Or it could even be you have the definition of customer, but Joe in sales is using a different one. You at least want to let him have that voice and say, hey, can we talk about this? I think we might be using a different definition. So one of the nice things about the tools out there now with the Wikipedia approach is that you can get a little more nuance to metadata. One is usage ranking, right? What data sets are people using? What reports are the most popular ones? Really great when you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Oh my gosh, everyone's using this total sales report, probably the one to start with, and let's look at there. People can sort of do that vote, the like button, right, on a dashboard, or this idea of that collaboration and crowdsourcing of definitions. For example, what's a part number? Is that the same as the component number? Maybe there's a history from Joe who's been doing this, saying, in the old days, this was didn't have letters. Does it have it now? And you can kind of have a discussion, right? So lots of times that's where you find that hidden tribal knowledge by letting people collaborate. And so at the same time, again, this is the balance. Sometimes you want that collaboration, you want that exploration, but at the same time, you do want to have it very known when this is the certified report. This is the good one, right? If you have too much churn and chatting, where do we go to know that this is the approved definition of regional sales by quarter or customer churn or whatever? And so as long as you're clear of this is the one we're kind of collaborating on and discussing, and maybe this is more exploratory and this is the approved thing we're sending to the board, then that's good to know. So a lot of the great tools out there now can kind of have that indicator that this is the trusted data set, either the data itself and or the reports. The other part is the people that I mentioned, and we could do a whole webinar on this, so I won't go in crazy detail, but just think of the idea of having a great tool that allows this collaboration. There's a lot of roles in data governance, from the business data owners who might be creating the definition of the KPI, to the data steward that might be a little bit more in the details around the rules, to more on the technical side, the data architects, the BI developers that have their aspect as well. Again, sometimes you have a committee or formal communication mechanisms. Sometimes you can let a tool do that, where you kind of have that chat and people can, again, share their different ideas, where the business might have one definition and the architect might say, well, that's not what the systems have it like. And you can kind of have that healthy discussion around the data. I mentioned the lineage, and I think this is something Marius is going to show, so I won't go too much into it, but a really technical concept that's also really simple for the business to understand of when I have a report on total sales. There's probably been a lot done to that to get it into that report. It might be in a nice clean data warehouse, and or it may have come from 3 different systems. From that, think of that horrible story I told where the company sent out renewal notices to people who didn't have the product, right? That was almost hard to do when you think about it. But had they looked at this report and said, okay, it came from, this one comes from the customer database, this one comes from the sales database on DB2, maybe I shouldn't use this one because I don't want prospects. The sales database has prospects in it. So sometimes, that lineage or the provenance or how data was calculated can be as helpful as the definition itself. So as with anything in life, finding that right balance is key, and picking a solution or a tool that doesn't lock you into either way. I've seen there's a lot of good tools in the market. I've seen companies go very badly in their implementation by picking one that's too much on one side, right? That you are a pharmaceutical company and it is very locked down, and they buy a tool that doesn't let you lock it down. They're too collaborative, or vice versa. They buy a tool that's so based on the standards and everything has to be approved. You miss the idea that you want to have some collaboration. So generally, most organizations have an aspect of either one of these. Or if you think back when are you more offense or are you more defense? The same kind of balance. So just think of when you're looking at your reports, which type of reports, and BI would fit more that standards-based, more lockdown governance, in which of maybe your more self-service and exploratory reports might fit more into that collaborative aspect. This is a kind of a busy chart, but this is a way I often think about it, of implement just enough data governance. Don't overdo it, but don't underdo it either, right? So your master and reference data, your enterprise reporting, again, if I have my annual report, I certainly hope that was strongly vetted, right? Because again, you might be reporting it to the street or to the board, et cetera. But you may be doing also either functional reports, that's just one department, give them some flexibility, or exploratory analytics, and let that be a little more free, because the whole idea of it is to be exploratory. And so, how much is this information shared? How locked down must it be? And the other thing is that this can be a cycle. Sometimes the things in exploratory analytics often get published up to be maybe included in more of an enterprise report. And then certain things, PCI, for example, that has to be locked down no matter what, right? So even one, again, unnamed company, we were just about to go live with the data governance. We were talking about PCI, and a very well-meaning younger gentleman raised his hand and said, so are you trying to say that I shouldn't be putting the credit card information out in the cloud for the test analytics? And the boss just very quickly said, Pradeep, we need to talk after work. It's easy to get the data. It's nice to be able to use the cloud for exploratory analytics, but when it's your credit card data out there, then that's a big deal. So certain things are that master reference enterprise that really needs to be kind of locked down. So as we look to, roll it out, there's a lot. Generally, one of the issues is how do we start to roll out and where do we start? As with anything, there's a balance. And some of the problems I see in organizations I work with is just trying to cut through the noise. There's so many reports and so much data. Where do we start? Can we define everything? And so don't boil the ocean. What is that business value lever, however, what's going to be that fulcrum that's going to drive the most business value? Is there 50 data elements or 10 data elements that are going to support a new marketing campaign that might also be the customer information that's going to help sales, right? What's those data sets that are going to be the smallest amount that are really going to drive that business value? And those might be the ones that you highly govern. And then everything else can kind of come with it. So don't boil the ocean. And so try to pick those quick wins. But at the same time, and I know this is all sort of obvious, but I forget it myself as I go because it's so easy to try to do too much. But if the other side of, if you only do quick wins ad hoc and don't plan it out, then you really don't get to your journey. So what's that journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You may need to climb the mountain, but you need to do it in small segments. So pick pieces of your reporting, pieces of the data, but then also have that map to your bigger picture so you know you're heading in the right direction. First, we'll start with sales, then we'll do marketing, then we'll do supply chain, but at least have that plan. A big fan of just quick questions that kind of help you with that when you try to build that roadmap. The one we all forget, I know I forget too often because I want to jump right into the tech, is the why. Why are we doing this? So, if we can't manage everything in the organization, what's going to have that biggest value? Are we trying to be more defensive? Are we trying to avoid an audit? Are we trying to be more on the offense and help sales drive more revenue? Are we trying to help the scientists and the organization find a new cure for cancer? Focus on that, right? So whatever it is, who are the stakeholders? And then how are you going to organize those roles? For data governance is important. Don't forget the people side. What reporting needs to be prioritized, which should tie into that why and how, and then plan this out. Don't necessarily do it ad hoc. Think, is there a big initiative like a big marketing campaign you could align with, and maybe focus on the reports and the data for that. So again, none of this, again, I keep saying this again, but it's not brain surgery, but I just find the more complex, what was this phrasing, when in doubt, zoom out. Right? There's going to be a lot. Let's break it down to some of these core questions of who's going to benefit, why are we doing it, when do we roll it out, and then how and what needs to be prioritized. So I do want to give Marius some time for the demo. So just in summary, BI and analytics are going to only continue to grow. I mean, we do a survey every year, and the need for analytics, the need for data, especially from business users, is always top of the list, and I don't see that changing. But to really make that effective, on the flip side, there's a lot of frustration around, are the numbers right? Is the data right? And so you need to get that practical and effective metadata management aligned with governance so that you can get those quick wins and really get the value of your BI investment. So without further ado, I do want to pass it over to Marius, who's going to give a little bit of a demo of some of the solutions that can help with some of the things I mentioned. So over to you, Marius.
Thank you so much, Donna. Wow, what a great presentation. And thank you. It was very, very helpful to hear all those really insightful and practical pieces of information as far as guidance. And I'm sure folks have a lot of questions, so please put them in the Q&A area, and we'll leave some time at the end to make sure that we get to those, and Donna can answer some of your questions. Before that, I wanted to show you a little bit about how Metric Insights in particular is used to do some of the things that Donna described. And I want to focus on two areas. One, I'll show you first, what is the user experience in a governed environment? So what does the user encounter as they work with analytics? And then we'll focus a little bit on how does content get governed. So first, let's focus on the end user. And here you see the Metric Insights portal, right? And the idea is that it's a governed space. So what you're looking at here is that you've got those little tiles in the middle, and there's a tile for every single visualization that's accessible to the user via the security model. And you can see that those can be Tableau dashboards or Power BI or ClickView or ClickSense, or any number of different type of tools that you might have. But they can also be things like PDFs and Excels and things that are, in your SharePoint environment or on shared drives that you want to bubble up. So as Donna said, there may be 20 or 30 or 40 different ways in which sales is summed up and shown, but there's probably a few that are consistent, that fit the governance framework around what you're defining as sales. Well, let's make sure all of those can be bubbled up into a governed environment. They can be organized coherently. So here you see on your left-hand side, there's another sort of the folder structure that's universal across all that content. And then there's information that can be shared across all those that's universal. So irrespective of where that content comes from, you know, I can look and I can see that it's certified. I can get metadata associated with it. I can get context before I go and actually consume the content. Okay. So let's dig a little deeper. So now let's imagine that I'm looking at this. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I've got the sales analysis dashboard. I might be interested in looking at this further. So now in a governed environment, we should be providing you the next level of detail. So a preview, if you like, right? So here I see a higher fidelity picture of that dashboard. What does it look like? And I also have a whole lot more metadata that provides me with context, right? So that metadata can include perhaps documentation. There's a release notes and definitions around this that I can go look at. There's also over here a set of tags that tell you, you know, what does this look like? So I've got, sorry, click too fast here. So I can see that what are the enterprise KPIs that are associated with this, and I can click on one of these KPIs, and I can see what the definition is. So as Donna mentioned, it's really important to understand, you know, what does sales mean? It can mean many different things. Well, in context of this dashboard, here's the definition of sales. Here are the business owners, technical owners, and data steward that are responsible for this particular data and its definition. And oh, by the way, we have a whole bunch of other content that also uses the same sales concept, would define exactly the same way. And here's a list of it, and I could click in and go explore that. So now I've gotten, when I'm looking at this, I understand I've got this visualization, it's measuring sales, here's the definition, and oh, by the way, there's everything else that I can connect to if I'm interested in exploring further. And then, you know, definitions, descriptions, maybe some expert commentary should all be there, as well as some of the key metadata that you might want to have visible to the user. So like, as Donna mentioned, a lot of effort can go into capturing metadata. You know, does this information contain PII data? Does this visualization, what's the data classification? Should it be internal use only? Or is it more broadly available? All that information, if it's captured somewhere, and if it just lives in some data catalog or in a wiki page or a Confluence page, well, it's not really any good to the person who's consuming the information. We need to make sure that we bubble that up so that any end consumer looking for a visualization can have all that context available to make the right decision about should they delve deeper into this visualization for their business question, and if yes, what are they really looking at? So with that, if I have the right context for my information, I can then click further, and I can now consume that visualization interactively, you know, within the portal. So I haven't left the portal, but I'm still now able to use that dashboard the same way that I would within Tableau. Again, however, it is enriched with all that same context that you saw in the preview, the definition, the tags, and in addition, we can layer on this additional piece of context that's time dependent. Things may be related to data quality. So for example, here I'm being notified as the consumer of this that, hey, there's some data load issues in the warehouse this morning, and you know, that's been affected and the data is not available yet. So there's going to be resolution for this, but what I'm looking at here actually has stale data. So in most organizations, there's some data quality that's happening, and maybe there's some scripts running in the background as the ETL is building, pipelines are building that warehouse. The key, though, is to make sure, if you're going to get value out of those, that those don't just generate alerts that go to the data pipeline engineer to resolve, but if there's a problem on that day, if you can't refresh the data, or if the data is delayed, that you can bubble up that information to the person that's like consuming that visualization directly here in the portal. Right, so now I have the context. I know that I don't need to go contact the analyst and tell them, hey, something's wrong here. You need to look at this, because somebody's working on this already. Similarly, scrolling down here, I can see the expert commentary. I can collaborate. Donna mentioned that a lot of insights, a lot of information can be gained through this Wikipedia type concept where people are collaborating and sharing information. So you can enable that whole discussion thread around the visualization and really build this whole ecosystem whereby it's a governed piece of content that I, as a user, can manage and understand what I'm looking at. And then, of course, another part of governance is all this information needs to be accessible to me. So if I go here in the search bar and I type sales, I should be able to be taken into an experience whereby I can find all the content that I might be looking for, irrespective of where it is housed, which tool. And I have the context of all the metadata when I'm doing that. So here you can see, for instance, that there are multiple things that reference sales. Many of them are certified, but it's picking out, giving me a top of list item here, the thing that has the highest level of engagement. So that's a great example of what Donna mentioned earlier, which is that, you know, the engagement should drive the decision that somebody makes about whether that particular analytic is the relevant one for them or not. I can also use that information explicitly to filter. So I can say, oh, you know, I only want to look at certified content. So let me filter down that content to that. And, you know, I only want to see things that have a certain level of engagement, and you can filter it further. So I can go from this very large universe of content that's out there, it's been published, to that maybe has been crowdsourced. Maybe some of this it has a little bit more of a Wikipedia feel to it. Very quickly and boil it down to the things that are authoritative, that are certified, that have a high level of engagement, and then know with confidence when I engage with that content that I can trust the information. So that's an example of the consumption model. Let's look for a moment before we go to Q&A at the publishing model. So Donna mentioned that there's a you know, it is the balance, right? That was a lot of discussion in the presentation about yin and yang, you know, the carrot and stick, and achieving balance between too much governance and too little. And so to do that from a practical perspective, you need to have a process that is suitable to the content that you're governing, and is simultaneously lightweight, but also provides the right level of governance when necessary. So this is an example of how we aim to strike that balance within the metric insights technology stack. So here what you're seeing is a Kanban style board where you're taking content and you're promoting it through the publishing process. So imagine for a moment that I come in here, I've got this new content silo. This has everything that exists in my BI environment in a particular area, maybe ready to be published. It automatically gets synchronized and pulled into the portal. So it's available for me to work with. And it can be put into a workflow. And in the workflow, then I move it through various stages of the workflow until it is complete and published and available to the end user. The person doing this is obviously the content publisher. And there might be different levels of process involved. You might have something very simple, whereas a content publisher, I just move it in and say, oh, this is what I want. I'm going to move it to in progress. I'm going to move it to complete, maybe add a little documentation, a little tagging, or it might be something very involved. A two-party or three-party certification process. So maybe I have something like this, where this content is the board level reporting that Donna mentioned, and here it has to go through developer review. A business person has to look at it and say, yes, this is correct. A data steward needs to look at it and say, this data comes from the right depositories. Only then can we be published and certified with the right level of certification. And depending upon your content, it can go through the right process. So let's just look at the example a little further. If we look at that very simple single party certification model, then in this model, perhaps what I do is I'm the publisher of this. I say, okay, I want to take retail sales. Let me go ahead and move it into the workflow. I'm going to move it into in progress. I'm going to assign it to somebody to work on. So I'm going to give it to Andrew here, maybe give it, notify that to Indeed, provide a comment if I want, and save it. That moves it into the next stage. Now imagine I'm Andrew coming in here. I can just come in and I can say, okay, I'm ready to process this through my workflow. I can hit this edit gear. I can add the tags that I might need for this content. Maybe add a description. I specify the classification, what the PI data should be, whatever, add documentation, whatever we defined as the right level of process around this item. This is highly customizable, of course, based on the content. Maybe set stewards and then say, okay, now I'm ready. I'm going to move this to the next stage. and I can then say, now it's ready and it's complete. So within a few clicks, I can really add the necessary metadata, move it from stage to stage. If it's a heavily governed item, it will go through multiple hands to ensure that it's correct. If it's lightly governed, the content publisher alone can do this and can set things into a complete status, certify it, and then now the person looking at the content in the portal will see it's certified, we'll see who certified it, and we'll gain from all of the metadata that has been used to enrich that content. So that's the governance process. And then the final piece that I think I want to highlight before we jump into questions is really around the measurements. So, we talked about, I think Don mentioned the fact that it's really important to really measure both usage and engagement and all these other aspects around governance. And this is an example of how we support this within the Metric Insights portal. So everything that you're consuming within the portal, we monitor, and then we allow you as a content publisher to understand of your content, what's happening to it, which is the content that you've created that's enormously popular, which is less popular, what's trending with increasing popularity, what's decreasing in popularity. I can see, that where I need to maybe promote this content and help boost this adoption. What's being unused? Maybe some of these things were useful a long time ago, but now they're no longer used. They were replaced by more useful content, and I should remove them. Or if it's actually useful, perhaps I need to promote that and generate awareness around it. So providing the tools that allow you to govern content for boosting of engagement. And that goes beyond sort of giving you this high level picture that just tells you which content is getting adoption and which is not, and goes into really understanding more of the nuances around the data that you're looking at, so that you can say, what I'm looking at the sales details report. I want to really understand a little more about what's going on with it. I know that it's had 52 views, but maybe what I really want to see is, well, what kind of engagement is happening with it over time? So it's one thing to know that it has 52 views. It's another thing to see, well, here are the people that are actually consuming it. And then, these circles represent time periods. So I've got, 1 day, 30 days, 60 day, 90 day. And in this time-lapse visualization, I can see if people are continuing to use the visualization, or if they are, coming in and then disappearing, like the Sam salesperson who just, came, took a look at this visualization, and it's been well over 30 days since they looked at it again. So that kind of insight, whether you're looking at it from a user-centric, a group-centric, or content-centric perspective, can be used to help you fine-tune the whole process of governing your content and ensuring that you've got the right level of adoption around it, irrespective of whether this is a Tableau dashboard, a Power BI dashboard, or perhaps a PDF or an Excel document that you've put out there that's really there for sharing within the team because it's the trusted source of information. And then finally, of course, this measurement should also apply to all the different things that from a governance perspective, from a compliance perspective, is your content being governed? So you can generate reports and say, how much of your content is being certified, who is certifying the content. You can look at who's publishing non-certified content and use all of this to really help, both with the carrot and the stick. So encouraging people to use the best practices that are out there. If there are things that are required, like you can imagine these kinds of reports for, did you tag the information with a PI, proper PI classification, things that are missing that classification or things of that nature, using the stick and making sure that goes into a process whereby that issue is resolved, so that everything that must be of a high quality is retained. So this is just a very high level picture, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an example of some of the types of things that you can use technologies such as Metric Insights to assist with governance. And with that said, I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So let's take a look and see what we have in the questions. So Q&A. Okay. So let me start reading the questions, Donna, and then you can one at the top right here. Okay, yes. Oh, sorry. So what metadata are important to be shown in the data lineage that is visualized in data quality context? So Donna, do you want to answer that first? Then I'm happy to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts, and yeah, I think your input would be really helpful too. So when we're talking pure data lineage, I think one thing to think of is who the audience is, and I think you should have more than one view. If it's a business view, I think some of the problems I've seen with implementation, again, with that just enough that we've been talking about is to not give too much of the technical metadata with it. So it literally might just be a really clear visualization of source to target, maybe in a visual or even just, text wise, what is the source of this data? I think as Marius mentioned, that idea of from those sources, is it trusted, the quality of that data, and so the reliability. I think from the business perspective, if we want to get into more of a technical lineage, then I think some of those ETL transformations and the data types and get more tech, and there's plenty of great tools that do that as well. But I think the first thing is to probably separate the audiences, because that's something I've seen go wrong in implementation of. You want to have all of that information is helpful in a true lineage, but just make sure to filter it for the right audience. But curious your thoughts, Marius.
Yeah, no, I think that's the audience part is very important because it is audience centric. If I'm looking at this at a particular report, I might want to look at a lineage diagram and understand, what's the database tables, where is it coming from, the data sets, things of that nature. As an end consumer of information, I want to know that if I'm receiving a particular report, where does that data source come from, probably more generally, and then there's also, from our perspective, the downstream lineage for an analytics. So where does it go? If I have a report, I may have that report actually show up in a bunch of distributions that are going to various users. So lineage can be more, the way we think about it, isn't just about the data. It's also about that particular piece of content and where, how does it, what are other places where it makes its way in within the ecosystem. So I think that's important as well. So looks like we've got a number of questions here from Yasser. So basically, do you recommend a specific data governance framework to work with? What maturity level assessment we can apply to it? So I know, Donna, you guys do a lot of work around the maturity assessments and using various data governance frameworks. Maybe you can speak a little bit to what you think are the recommended frameworks to adopt.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Yeah, full disclosure, we have our own maturity assessment. We do. We'd be happy to help. There we go. Put that plug in. But I would just say what I caution is do you recommend a governance framework? I mean, I think there's great things to start with. The data management body of knowledge, or the DAMA group, I think is a great one. I think that encapsulates a lot of the best practices to start with, but there is no one framework that you can just apply to your organization. I where I've seen a lot of things go wrong is that people do something like, well, the DAMA DMBOK kind of said that we should have a committee, so we're going to have a committee, and that's, I don't think that makes sense. So I do not think there is a framework that you can leverage, but I think there's a lot of good resources. I would start with DAMA because that's sort of almost the gold standard. And they have a certification as well. So that's my thoughts there. But yeah, please don't take a framework and just apply it to your company. Do give some thought to your organization.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. We see that over and over. That like Donna mentioned in the beginning of our presentation, just as she talked about the Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia, and whether it's authoritative or not, applying the right principle. It's the same thing applies here. You can pick a great framework that might work in a large, highly structured bank. And if you take that same framework to a agile, rapidly moving startup, that would be a huge failure. So it's really about fit more than anything else, from my experience. Here's another question. If I'm starting a data governance initiative from scratch in my org, what are the very first 3 steps I should take? What do you start with? So Donna, what do you advise your clients when they're really getting started as sort of the practical first few steps they should take?
Yeah, I think some of the things you just touched on and what I mentioned in the previous statement would be what kind of company are you and why are you doing governance? I think like you just said, Marius, are you a big bank that needs something very structured? Is it more loose? Where do I just need to start with baby steps? I think the why, again, is this an audit, et cetera. I do think there's a technical and a business aspect. So, I would start with the why and the how of what kind of organization and what are the drivers for it. And then I guess where I see folks go wrong is either they focus too much on the tech and getting things like Lineage in place and then forget the people, or vice versa. We have committees and people, but not the tech. So I would just take a quick look at all of those to start with. Who would be my data stewards? Who are the owners? How do we organize them? And then what tools would augment them? And it kind of, as we've touched on a lot in this, of what are the right tools for them? Is it very business centric? Are we doing a lot of BI, or is it very data centric and we should focus on the data? So those are some things to think of as you start.
Yeah, I was, as I was thinking about this question, I thought back down to the slide that you had, that I thought was really great, of the mountain climber, and how, you know, you want to take have those initial first wins, but not lose sight of the journey. And I think that, you know, one of the things I would add to that paradigm is that when you do these kind of governance initiatives, you have to realize that, you know, people are naturally skeptical. It's very hard oftentimes with senior management to have them understand why governance is really important. And so you need to have the ability to generate incremental value. So it's almost like you want to have that goal, and understand that on every step towards that goal, you are going to have to continue justifying the cost to get to go through the journey. So the first few steps, it's not a one size fits all here. It's really about identifying, you know, what can you do? Where can you apply our governance where it's going to have a high level of visibility and immediate impact, such that you can build the capital that then you can take towards that next step, and so on and so forth, as you're going up the journey up the mountain. So, you know, just think of that when you're looking at candidate things that you can.
I just want to second that. You know, all the first three steps are very different in terms of what tech you use, what people. The thing across any organization, whether you're a big bank or a small startup, is those first implementations have to show that value. You know, because you're right, Marius, people have a short attention span. This isn't something they probably want to do to start with, so you need to show them why it's really helpful. I would definitely agree with that.
Okay, so let's see if there's a few other questions. Would this also be able to track show usage of embedded information, report tiles, dashboards? Embedded meaning that I make information available in the line of business application right there when the person. Okay, so I think this is actually a question specifically to Metric Insights, and I assume the question is, will the usage analysis that I showed, the engagement stats, will that work if that content is embedded? For example, let's say that Tableau dashboard that we're looking at is embedded, let's say in Salesforce, or in some other application that's being used. Will that be tracked? And the answer is yes. That the embedding, the way it works is that independent of where you consume the content, whether you're consuming in the portal or whether it's being embedded elsewhere, we collect the usage information, and then it's available for analysis and across all the different tools that you would be using. And then there's another question. Let's see. I guess there's another tool question. Does this tool pull the definitions of the data from SharePoint or Confluence, or someone need to add it to the tool? So the way that works is we collect the metadata from the source system. So for example, we'll pull an object from SharePoint. If we can generate the object list, and we can pull whatever metadata is available there. And then most of our customers, that's a starting point. So, you know, for example, with Tableau as another example, you maybe get the name of the description from Tableau, but you maybe don't have all the tags, or you maybe don't have all the descriptions. So there might be other information about certification that isn't in that system. So you can then supplement that information either through that kind of workflow that I showed you, where you're entering it, or you can do that through what we call content sync, where you bring in that metadata from other sources. So some of our customers have these big Excel spreadsheets where they track that information, or SharePoint lists where they keep track of governance information for some of the visualizations, or perhaps they're using something like a Calibra or an Olation, and they're tracking certification information and various attributes there. So the idea is that you can bring that information in from those sources and automatically synchronize without having it to re-enter. So the philosophy is source it wherever it exists, and then if it doesn't have a system of record, then you can use that workflow type model to add that metadata there. Okay, so I think some of the other questions we'll have to get to, because we only have one last question. So Donna, that was the last question for you. I see some companies have their data governance initiative as simple as shared document, having all KPIs, data sources, RACI matrix, and all that stuff. Can this be considered a full data governance application?
Yeah, no, I think that would be a great start, or a tool like Metric Insights that could, I think, probably have some of that same information. But I would not say that's full data governance. I think full data governance, we would have to have sort of the people aspect, the roles, policies, procedures, workflows. So I think it could be an aspect of it, but I think it was the same person that asked about a governance framework, would probably be a good thing to start with, because the framework would kind of see where what you have today is a great starting point, but all the things you can add around it in that framework. So I would think there's a bit more to add around that.
Okay, well, I think we'll leave it at that. If you asked a question and we didn't answer it, Zoe will follow up with you and make sure you get your answer. We'd like to really thank you for attending. I want to thank Donna for just incredibly informative and fun presentation. And thank you all for giving us an hour of your time and joining our webinar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.